The Israel-Hamas war is a complex and ongoing conflict that has implications for the U.S. and the world. Here are some of the main ways the war affected America. 1. Oil and gas prices. 2. Impact on U.S. GDP growth. 3. Impact on U.S. high inflation. 4. Geopolitical uncertainty. 5. Trade and investment. 6. Impact on global economic growth and U.S. sectors. Let's dive deeper into its explanation. 1. Oil and gas prices. The ongoing conflict has introduced a heightened level of volatility and uncertainty within the global oil market, exerting an impact on oil and gas prices not only in the United States but also in other nations. The surge in oil prices attributed to this conflict directly affects consumers domestically and challenges the U.S. Federal Reserve in its efforts to combat inflation. Additionally, the rise in oil and gas costs ripples through various industries, such as transportation, notably affecting truckers responsible for shipping goods across the nation. Following the recent attack by Hamas on Israel, global oil prices experienced a 4% spike. However, experts in the energy sector anticipate that the Israel-Hamas conflict alone may not significantly drive up oil and gasoline prices. The potential for a broader regional confrontation involving actors like Iran or Saudi Arabia holds the potential to disrupt trade and energy flows between Europe and Asia. This scenario could trigger a series of sanctions and counter-sanctions with repercussions for the global economy. Furthermore, any constraints on the supply of oil, compounded by prior cuts to exports by major producers like Saudi Arabia and Russia, could exert upward pressure on oil prices. The extended closure of a natural gas field off the coast of Israel may also lead to reduced Israeli gas exports to neighboring countries, Egypt and Jordan, while intensifying the strain on an already tightly balanced global gas market, consequently causing energy prices to rise. 2. Impact on U.S. GDP growth. Oil and gas prices exert influence on the U.S. GDP growth by affecting the demand and supply dynamics of goods and services in the economy. Elevated oil and gas prices diminish consumers' disposable income, leading to reduced expenditure on other goods and services. This decrease in aggregate demand translates into lower output and employment levels. Moreover, heightened oil and gas prices escalate production costs for businesses, prompting them to pass on a portion of these expenses to consumers through higher prices. This, in turn, leads to an increase in the inflation rate, eroding the purchasing power of both consumers and businesses. The resultant inflationary pressure prompts the Federal Reserve to raise interest rates as a measure to curtail price growth, subsequently rendering borrowing more costly for both consumers and businesses. This, in turn, diminishes investment and consumption spending, further impacting output and employment levels. Estimates suggest that a 10% increase in oil prices can lead to a reduction of 0.2 percentage points in short-term U.S. GDP growth and 0.5 percentage points in the long run. However, the actual impact hinges on several factors, including the magnitude and duration of the oil price shift, the responsiveness of supply and demand to price fluctuations, the structural composition of the economy, and the policy response from central banks and governments. Generally, a substantial and enduring surge in oil prices will exert a more pronounced influence on GDP growth compared to a modest and transitory one. Additionally, an economy that exhibits a higher dependence on oil or possesses limited flexibility in adapting to price shifts may be more vulnerable to GDP growth fluctuations than an economy with a lower reliance on oil or greater adaptability. 3. Impact on U.S. high inflation. The increase in oil and gas prices also directly influences high inflation in the United States. This is primarily due to the escalation in the cost of energy commodities, including gasoline, diesel, and heating oil, which form integral components of the Consumer Price Index, CPI. Notably, energy commodities accounted for approximately 4% of the CPI as of December 2021. Consequently, a surge in oil prices tends to elevate the CPI and, consequently, the inflation rate. Furthermore, the rise in oil and gas prices contributes to the inflation rate by increasing the production costs across various industries. Oil serves as a critical input for numerous sectors, encompassing petrochemicals, plastics, asphalt, cosmetics, and agriculture. Higher oil prices inflate the cost of these inputs, subsequently leading to an upswing in the prices of finished products. Oil prices also have a direct bearing on transportation costs, a vital component of various goods and services. An increase in oil prices raises expenses associated with shipping goods via truck, rail, air, or sea, while also elevating the costs of commuting and travel for consumers. These augmented costs eventually find their way to consumers in the form of higher prices. Estimates underscore that a 10% increase in oil prices could potentially curtail short-term GDP growth in the U.S. by 0.2 percentage points and long-term growth by 0.5 percentage points. As previously noted, these effects are contingent upon factors such as the magnitude and duration of oil price fluctuations fluctuations, the degree of responsiveness of supply and demand to price changes, the structural composition of the economy, and the response of central banks and governments. In general, a substantial and enduring increase in oil prices is likely to exert a more pronounced impact on inflation in comparison to a moderate and short-lived change. Additionally, economies that display a greater dependence on oil or possess less adaptability to price fluctuations may be more susceptible to inflation than economies with reduced reliance on oil or greater flexibility in adjusting. 4. Geopolitical uncertainty. High inflation in the U.S. is also influenced by the geopolitical uncertainty triggered by Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which has intensified tensions within NATO and heightened the risk of a military conflict. The ongoing situation in Ukraine could disrupt trade and energy flows between Europe and Asia, and potentially incite a series of sanctions and counter-sanctions with the potential to adversely affect the global economy. Simultaneously, the U.S. faces challenges from China, which seeks to expand its influence while engaging in rivalry with the U.S. in the Middle East and other regions. Geopolitical uncertainty exerts an influence on U.S. high inflation by shaping expectations regarding future price changes. If individuals anticipate a continued escalation or stability in geopolitical tensions, they may adjust their behavior accordingly. For instance, workers may demand higher wages to offset the increased cost of living, and businesses may choose to raise prices to safeguard their profit margins. These actions could set in motion a self-fulfilling prophecy, further elevating inflation. Conversely, if expectations point toward a reduction or stabilization of geopolitical tensions, behavioral adjustments may be less pronounced, potentially resulting in subdued inflation. The influence of geopolitical uncertainty extends to the response of central banks to price changes. If central banks perceive geopolitical tensions as temporary or short-lived, they may adopt a more restrained approach in response to rising inflation, keeping interest rates low to support economic growth. Conversely, if central banks perceive geopolitical tensions as persistent or long-lasting, they may react more assertively to inflation by raising interest rates to curb price growth. This, in turn, would heighten borrowing costs for consumers and businesses, ultimately diminishing the demand and supply of goods and services in the economy. The resultant reduction in output and employment would contribute to the long-term containment of inflation. 5. Trade and investment. The war has significantly disrupted trade and investment flows between the United States and the Middle East, as well as with other regions affected by the conflict. The United States is a major exporter of arms, technology, and agricultural products to Israel, while simultaneously serving as a significant importer of oil from countries in the Middle East, including Saudi Arabia and other Gulf allies. The ongoing conflict has the potential to jeopardize these economic ties, particularly if the situation escalates into a broader regional confrontation involving actors such as Iran and Saudi Arabia. Furthermore, the war could have ramifications for U.S.-China trade relations, given that China holds a substantial economic presence in the Middle East and is a key partner to both Israel and Iran. China has actively sought to expand its influence in the Middle East, further complicating the dynamics. The conflict may create new tensions or opportunities for cooperation between the United States and China in various domains, ranging from sanctions and nuclear proliferation to addressing human rights concerns. Trade and investment exert a significant impact on U.S. GDP growth by influencing net exports and capital formation within the economy. Net exports represent the difference between exports and imports of goods and services, while capital formation refers to the accumulation of physical assets such as machinery, equipment, and buildings used for production. An upswing in trade and investment augments both net exports and capital formation, leading to an increase in output and employment. Conversely, a decline in trade and investment reduces both net exports and capital formation, contributing to diminished output and employment. Estimates indicate that a 10% reduction in trade and investment could potentially reduce short-term U.S. GDP growth by 0.4 percentage points and long-term growth by 0.8 percentage points. These effects are contingent upon a variety of factors, including the scale and duration of changes in trade and investment, the responsiveness of supply and demand to price fluctuations, the structural composition of the economy, and the response of central banks and governments. In general, substantial and sustained decreases in trade and investment have a more pronounced impact on GDP growth compared to minor and transitory changes. Additionally, economies that maintain a high degree of openness to trade and investment or exhibit strong complementarity with trading partners may be more susceptible to fluctuations in GDP growth than economies with less openness to trade and investment or higher substitutability with trading partners. 6. Impact on global economic growth and U.S. sectors. The war has cast a shadow over the prospects for global global economic growth and the recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic, which could have ramifications for the U.S. economy. According to estimates by the International Monetary Fund, IMF, a sustained 10% increase in oil prices has the potential to trim 0.15 percentage points off global economic growth while adding 0.4 points to inflation in the subsequent year. However, it is essential to recognize that a prolonged conflict can stimulate certain sectors of the U.S. economy, including those related to defense, security, and humanitarian aid. The war could also introduce changes to the U.S. labor market. Some American workers may encounter increased risks or opportunities contingent on their skills and the industries in which they are employed. In conclusion, the interplay between oil and gas prices, geopolitical uncertainty, and disruptions in trade and investment flows significantly impacts various facets of the U.S. economy, from high inflation to GDP growth and sector-specific dynamics. It underscores the intricate web of global interdependencies that dictate economic outcomes and highlights the necessity of proactive strategies for managing and responding to these complex dynamics. Thank you for joining us on this exploration of the intricate web of factors that link geopolitical turmoil, oil and gas prices, and their far-reaching consequences. The dynamic interplay between these elements significantly shapes economic landscapes. As the world grapples with uncertainty, the resilience and adaptability of economies and policymakers will be crucial. Stay tuned for more insights, and until next time, take care.